much for joining us. My name is Caradina Sale with the Community Technical Assistance Center at the NYU Silver School of Social Work's McSilver Institute. And I would like to extend a warm welcome for you to today's webinar called Trauma and Addiction. It's actually a training, 2-hour training. We are together for 2 hours this morning. During this morning's important training, we are going to hear about the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model and how it shifts the current pathologizing paradigm to a strength-based approach. We're going to see how addictive behaviors are the body's attempt to emotionally regulate by acting as propellers that facilitate neurophysiological shifts in our nervous system. Today's training will also discuss treating trauma and addiction with a brief introduction to the Embodied assessment and treatment tool, and we will use several other tools for working with addiction that were emailed to you. So please have them ready to use along with some crayons or colored pencils. You should have received 4 different worksheets. Okay. But before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone to our system. Most of you probably know this, but just really quickly that you're all muted to avoid any background noises. If you have any challenges today or technical issues, you can chat to our host, Kiara, who will be able to assist you. We will have a Q&A. We're going to wrap up around 11:45 for a Q&A, but we are going to take questions throughout this entire training. So any question you have, just chat it in the chat box, which, as you know, the chat features at the bottom panel. For your best viewing experience, you can go to the top right corner and click view and click side-by-side speaker. Thank you so much to our presenter and trainer and amazing psychotherapist who's presenting today, Jan Winhall. Jan began her career as a social worker and psychotherapist over 40 years ago. She is the director of Focusing on Borden, a psychotherapy and training center where she creates spaces and relationships built on focusing-oriented practices to offer healing experiences for her clients. In addition, Jan teaches as an adjunct lecturer at the University of Toronto in the Department of Social Work. During her career, Jan has observed the ways in which individuals utilize self-harming behaviors to seemingly escape intolerable emotional states. As a clinician encountering clients with compulsive self-harming and addictive behaviors in increasing numbers, Jan has focused her therapy on attempting to appeal to the addicted person using the polyvagal lens theory. She has integrated the polyvagal lens theory to create a more sophisticated way of understanding emotional regulation, where addictive behavior is an embodied response to emotional dysregulation. In her book, Treating Addiction with the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model, a bottom-up approach, Jan discusses assessing people's capacity to self-regulate and co-regulate their physiological states with others. I'm going to pass it along to Jan now. Thank you so much, Jan, for being here with us. And we have a lot of people chatting in, working with teens and adults of trauma, often coping with substances. So I don't know if you've been looking at some of the chat.
A little bit, yeah.
Great. We have a lot of people that seem to have experience with, a lot of people they didn't receive the worksheets, they're saying.
I'm going to resend them in the chat as well.
Okay, we're going to resend them in the chat.
Don't worry about that.
Okay.
You can always get them after as well.
We have someone who's an EMDR therapist, create a curriculum using trauma-informed yoga, mindfulness.
Beautiful.
Right. Someone has a little experience with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I have a fair amount of experience with somatic practices, but not very much with addictions. Thank you, Lee. Peer recovery coach, Lenora. Thank you. I work with girls with addictions. Great. Okay. A lot of people seem to work with addiction, but not very familiar with somatic.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Jan, I'm passing it on to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. So I want to start this morning with a practice where we begin slowly to settle down into the body. So a very different way for some of you to be working. This is a practice called the primacy of human presence. And this practice comes from one of my most, I guess, influential teachers, Gendlin, who's really the father of the term felt sense, which is one of those terms that's being used a lot these days. But I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of really understanding more about how the felt sense really works. So what I'd like you to do now is to settle yourselves in your chair, or if you'd like to stand up, sometimes bodies like to stand up when we're just beginning to get a sense of dropping down inside. So being with ourselves from the inside and just putting aside pencils, papers, all of that stuff so that you can really allow yourself to slowly settle down and begin to get a sense of all of us here in the room. There's a lot of us. There's over 200 people now that have joined. So just coming into the space, feeling into the morning, and then slowly, if it feels okay for you, to just begin to soften your gaze. And I'm going to read to you these beautiful words of Gendlin, and you may want to close your eyes. So here we go. I want to start with the most important thing that I have to say. The essence of working with another person is to be present as a living being. And that is lucky, because if we had to be smart or good or mature or wise, then we would probably be in trouble. But what matters is not that. What matters is to be a human being with another human being, to recognize the other person as another being in there, even if it's a cat or a bird. If you're trying to help a wounded bird, the first thing you have to know is that there is somebody in there, and that you have to wait for that person, that being in there, to be in contact with you. That seems to me to be the most important thing. So when I sit down with someone, I take my troubles and feelings and I put them over here on one side, close, because I might need them. I might want to go in there and see something. And I take all the things that I've learned, client-centered therapy, reflection, focusing, Gestalt, psychoanalytic concepts, and everything else. And I wish I had even more. And I put them over here on the other side, close. And then I am just here with my eyes. And there is this other being. If they happen to look into my eyes, they will see that I am just a shaky being. I have to tolerate that. They may not look, but if they do, they will see that. They will see the slightly shy, slightly withdrawing, insecure existence that I am. And I have learned that that is okay. I do not need to be totally emotionally secure and firmly present. I do need to be present. There are no qualifications for the kind of person I must be. What is wanted for the big therapy process, the big development process, is a person who will be present. And so I have gradually become convinced that even I can be that. Even though I have my doubts when I am by myself, in some objective sense, I know I am a person. So here we see, as we begin to come back together, this way in which Gendlin is really encouraging us to move into a different way of being, to really shift into our sense of our own bodies. And in our culture, you know, we've really lost that. We've lost the connection with embodied knowing. This really came about after Descartes. There was this huge influence of really thinking over feeling and experiencing. But Gendlin takes us back into this world, and so does polyvagal theory, because really what we're doing here is, in my model, is blending the felt sense of Gendlin, the moving into how the body carries wisdom inside, and integrating that into the autonomic nervous system in polyvagal theory and Steve Porges' work. So I'm going to share screen now. And here we go. Okay, so here's the title of my book, Treating Trauma and Addiction with the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model. And we've just looked at the primacy of human presence. Gendlin really encouraged us to think beyond patterns. And that's what I really want to give you today, is this capacity to move beyond our existing paradigm of understanding trauma and addiction, particularly addiction in a very sort of cognitive brain disease model, and to empty our minds and our bodies of that and allow something fresh to come in that's a new pattern, a new way of understanding addictions through the lens of the polyvagal theory. So over really 40 years ago now, I began working with a group of young women who were incest survivors. And this is where I really learned everything that I've kind of taken into this new model from these young women, because what I saw happening for them was that they were really struggling inside in their bodies to be able to find a way to settle themselves emotionally and physically. And in the hospital setting that we were meeting in, it was a very pathologizing model, as it still is, really. These women were seen as, mostly they were diagnosed as borderline personality disorder. But I wasn't buying that. I was a hippie back in those days, and I didn't adhere to traditional models. Lots of us were reading, things like The Myth of Mental Illness, Thomas A's book. So I allowed myself to just be with these beautiful young women who were being tortured and to notice what was happening in their bodies. And what they were describing to me were many different ways that they were self-harming. So cutting the body, using a lot of drugs and alcohol, acting out in unsafe sexual ways, all of these different ways that they felt in some intuitive way helped them, but they didn't really understand how. They had a sense that somehow it was numbing. These behaviors were numbing, or sometimes these behaviors were actually ways of jolting the body to wake the body up. So back then, I looked around and I really allowed the community of feminist therapists to influence what I was experiencing, and began to really understand that when we could move out of this pathologizing way of understanding what was happening for women and seeing addictions as just parts of a real disorder, then we could start to understand addiction and other trauma responses like dissociation as actually being adaptive responses. So, even back then, there were people like Laura Davis and Ellen Bass who wrote The Courage to Heal. And they said, the problem that survivors are experiencing with their bodies, splitting and numbing and addictions, began as attempts to survive. So I began to get a sense of what was happening. Then I found Judith Herman's book, beautiful, wonderful book called The Trauma and Recovery, still an amazing book. And in there, she talked about these jolts that people will activate in the body as a way of really numbing. So we didn't have polyvagal theory back then in terms of understanding the numbing as part of that dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, which we'll get to. But Judith Herman did understand the autonomic nervous system enough to know that there were these jolts happening in the body that helped survivors to be able to shift those neurophysiological states in the autonomic nervous system. So this work is really a call to action. this is if there was ever a time that we need to really rethink how we're working, particularly with addiction, but also trauma, it's now. So much is happening in the world with COVID, and also with the war in Ukraine and other wars that have been happening all over the world. And all of us are in these states of trying to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves. And the autonomic nervous system is our body's way of attempting to keep us safe. So no wonder polyvagal theory has become so important and valued in terms of understanding what is going on for us now in the world, because it's so clear now that our bodies really take over and help us to adapt when we're feeling, when we are under threat. So the typical way of understanding addiction, this top-down kind of way, that it's a disease, and we in Western culture, we tend to see the body as kind of machine-like. This we really put to the side, and we shift these paradigms into, okay, so what is actually happening in the body, and how is the body designed to help us under these situations of incredible threat? So here's the shift in paradigms, and moving from actually seeing addictions as maladaptive to seeing them as adaptive ways of being able to take us into a state of numbing and dissociating and shutting down when we don't have any alternative. When safety around us isn't possible, and for many people in our culture and in the world, it has never been possible. What we do then is shift into what I call like a backup plan in the autonomic nervous system, to a way of being able to shut down and cope with not having to deal with overwhelming feelings that arise in that sympathetic fight place in the nervous system. So I like to think of addictions very simply, that they help you in the short term by either numbing you or waking you up, that they hurt you in the long term, and that you can't stop doing them. And that really is a very simple way of talking with clients about what is going on for them and how they're struggling in their bodies. Important to really understand what is happening in terms of addiction and trauma through an antioppressive lens. And so we see the trauma of embodied racism and white supremacy in our culture. We see how misogyny is part of what creates this oppressive system in our culture. Poverty is a huge part, hypermasculinity, heteronormativity, all of these ways that oppression contributes to high rates of trauma and addiction. And you know, when we tend to see addictions as brain diseases, it's really a very sort of convenient way of not looking at cultural and embodied trauma. And we're learning more and more about how this really is the root of so much of addiction, not necessarily coming from even within the family, but more and more being a result of global trauma that we're all experiencing. So when we make these shifts into understanding and appreciating that there's a role that addictions play in the body, that they are in their own ways of helping us to adapt and to survive, that this is simply how bodies work. This is what I say to my clients. This is just how bodies work. They will go to this way of functioning in order to help you when you don't feel, when the body does not feel safe enough to be present. So our role as therapists is to really continue to work on ourselves, to be as present as possible, to invite people into a space, a container where we can invite, sometimes coax gently people to become more present. And this really does create these very joyous moments of real liberation for clients. When you shift into seeing addictions in this way, it really makes this work much more enjoyable, really, because you're offering people this incredible freedom from guilt and shame in a way that I've never seen before. Here's an example of the first model that I created. You can see that I had this sense of flooding over here in this traumatic place and numbing down the other end. And this is what we called this struggle with emotion regulation back 40 years ago when we were working with it. We knew that there was flooding in the sympathetic branch of the nervous system of flight, fight. And we knew that there was numbing, but we didn't have polyvagal theory to help us to understand that this indeed is part of what makes up the autonomic nervous system. So I went hunting for a way of being able to help my clients with what was happening in their bodies internally. I could see it physiologically, these shutting down and getting super activated places. And I found focusing, Gendlin's work. And what Gendlin did is he studied therapy sessions that were going well. And he found in interviewing therapists and clients that the therapists that were doing well were people who were actually living in their bodies. They were integrated into what we would call now the ventral part of that vagus, the grounded state. And so Gendlin asked them about how they were, what was their process, and he noticed it in the therapy sessions. And so he made 6 steps to help people to find what he then called the felt sense in the body. So this is kind of like when you come into therapy and you may be in a kind of anxious state, and with compassion and with enough creating of a safe container, you tell your story and your story is witnessed, and the therapist holds this space and allows your process to unfold in the body. So dropping down inside. And we all know this place where we feel a shift that comes when, in a sense, it's like we've had a good cry. We've been heard by someone who cared deeply and was able to listen deeply without judgment and to understand how bodies work and how triggers work, which we will get to. And there's this kind of release and physical shifting in the body that occurs that Gendlin saw. And this is what I saw too in the women, is that when we came together and when we were able to, in polyvagal terms, co-regulate with each other in this grounded way, bodies start to shift because we know really the direction of healing. A body knows how to heal a physical wound, and bodies know how to heal emotional wounds too, with a caveat that when we get triggered, we get stuck in a trauma loop that as therapists, we need to help our clients to move away from. As that shifts and we move away from that trauma loop, addictions start to disappear, because addictions don't occur in an integrated state. They occur when we are dysregulated and we're struggling to try to move from feeling overwhelmed to numbing or back again. So these 2 moments of movement that I began to see, this felt shift, or what Gendlin called the motor of change in the body. And he did some beautiful research with Carl Rogers. He was a student of Rogers. They measured things like galvanic skin response, the pins and needles and the goosebumps rather that we get when we're in that sympathetic state. The body immediately goes to goosebumps. And we see there so clearly, like, bodies talk to us very clearly. We've just forgotten we live in our bodies. We've forgotten to listen to how the body informs us and carries us forward. He also measured interestingly, heart rate variability, which is something that Steve Porges based his research on. So I was very excited when I saw those studies. What I did is I traced this felt shift in the body and made the connection with the shift in autonomic states from sympathetic to dorsal in the dissociated state, and then back again. And then in the healing journey down into the grounded state. So often, and you may be thinking this, maybe if you don't work with addiction, people will say to me, well, I'm a trauma therapist and I don't work with addictions. And I sometimes say, and sometimes just think, well, indeed, you probably do. Because if a person is living in a trauma loop, they need these strategies, these ways of being able to propel themselves from this overwhelmed feeling to a shutting down feeling or back again. And so very often we are working with addictions, but people are so shamed about it in our culture. It's seen as being bad or wrong, or even for some folks, feeling sick feels shameful too, and certainly not empowering. They won't tell you, especially with things like sex addiction, which is very prevalent. They won't tell you. So the importance of asking and making it, normalizing it as much as possible to say something like, you know, most people with trauma histories like you've got are using something, some ways that become addictive over time because they're just so helpful in the moment. We know that they hurt you down the road, but they help you in the moment. So this is just how bodies work. And when you say it like that, often people will tell you. And if you don't ask, they probably won't tell you. And then you're in a quandary because, you know, we're trying to encourage people to come into presence and to stop addictive behaviors that hurt them in the long run. But the body has another agenda. The body is going to stay in that addictive loop until it feels safe enough to be able to make the shift. So when we work with bodies and in polyvagal language, we work with the body and the autonomic nervous system, that part of the body that watches to see whether we're safe or not. It's a term that Steve calls neuroception. We work with neuroception as a collaborator. And so we really invite that collaboration into the room, which really removes the power struggle. It's a very powerful way of working with addiction. This is the second model that I created. It comes from a lot of work that I started to get excited about in interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel's beautiful work. I studied with Bonnie Badenoch, just a wonderful therapist and writer. And so this was the second way that I began to understand, oh, so these flight-fight places are what Siegel calls chaotic places, right, in the nervous system. And you can see at the bottom of the model, the ventral vagus is like that grounded place where there's a real solid sense of integration. And I began to get a sense at the top of the model that addictions were ways of being able to shift from one state to another. So here was the second sort of phase of the model, interpersonal neurobiology. I love his work because it's both top down and bottom up. And we'll talk a bit more about that, the importance of the bottom up of the body, but also the importance when we understand triggers and helping clients to work through triggers, that we welcome top-down processing. Cognitive top-down processing is very important. It's just that what we're saying is that it's a matter of integration of both so that people can really harness the prefrontal cortex through that cognitive way of helping clients when they're grounded enough in their bodies to be able to access it. So Siegel talks a lot about attachment theory and the early work of Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby. And then Mary Main and Dan Siegel did a lot of work together in developing the attachment profile. So interpersonal neurobiology really emphasizes the states of growth and restoration and integration, which we see now is so much a part of also polyvagal theory. So probably many of you know, in working with families and children about attachment theory. And what I did is I integrated it into the nervous system. So we see these 4 different styles of attachment. The secure attachment is what we call the safe nest in the community in which I work. We make these safe containers for clients. And this is the grounded place in the body, or that ventral branch of the vagus nerve, which is above our diaphragm. The ventral branch goes up through our diaphragm into our heart, up into our throat, and through to the ear, and around into our face. And so we see with parents who are able to really create this secure attachment, how baby settles in and children settle into the body. And this is where we want people to be able to congregate. Then you can see also with your families and children, youth that you're working with, the places of insecure attachment, the places where parents are either really avoidant in that sympathetic flight fight place that their bodies are in. So when their bodies are in that place, their way of connecting with their baby's bodies is insecure, and makes baby feel held in this very insecure, either distanced way or ambivalent. So there's a closeness, but often unpredictable, of maybe too much closeness when the parent is anxious, or then kind of dismissing when the parent is avoidant. And the last kind of style of attachment, disorganized, this is the really very traumatized place for children and youth, and growing up for adults. It really shapes the whole nervous system. This is where our parents are either really terrifying in their absence or their abusiveness, or they are terrified caregivers and they are shut down in dissociation. This is the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve. I have some problems with traditional attachment theory, and I'm not alone in that. I went looking around, reading about ways of really understanding attachment theory through an antioppressive lens, because there are real problems with it. Found this wonderful quote in a book called Too Far Gone, Gone Too Far. 2 of the problematics of attachment theory's role, namely its inability to effectively account for cross-cultural variations in parenting practices, and its privileging of one particular attachment style of self-control, which is really that self-control part of white body supremacy, shutting things down, living in cognition. And, you know, what about other kinds of families, queer families, trans families? I think the whole area of attachment theory is being challenged. It's beautiful work, but we need to expand it and take it out more. Stacey Haynes writes about this quite nicely too in her book, The Politics of Trauma. I love her work. It's wonderful. And people are doing lots of different kinds of analyzing and critiquing this work as well. So it's evolving over time as we're really challenging each other to grow and think outside of that traditional paradigm with the kind of pathologizing model. That's one way of being and seeing, but it's only one way. And as Gendlin says, when you put what you know and think beside you on one side, and all of how you're feeling about your life as much as you can, what's ever getting in there on the other side, then you make this clear space to be with your client and hear what it's like for them. And you can then hear freshly what is happening inside them. And it helps us to move beyond traditional patterns of thinking. So what I want to do now is to stop sharing and to come back to you. And I'd like us to do a practice that helps us to really be able to get a sense of what is happening inside us right now in terms of our bodies, the way that all of this that I've just presented to you is impacting you right in this moment in your body, as I'm asking you to make some shifts, to open yourselves, to go down inside. So we're going to start with a beautiful practice of grounding inside, coming to a place where you can feel some sense of being okay inside the body. And then we're going to go to an experience that's tender, not the worst experience, but to choose something that feels like a kind of wounded place that needs some attention, but not the deepest wound. And we're going to explore how your body helped you or where you went in that place of wounding. And this begins to give us more of a sense of, what do I do when I am looking for soothing? What do I do? And what did I do early on? So you'll notice as you go inside, let your body choose, but use your top-down process to make sure that that wounded place is something you can handle, something that you can be with, because we don't want people to get really triggered or activated. And then we're going to come back to the grounded place. So you'll get a real sense of how to work with the body, how to blend different states in the body. It's a beautiful experiencing of this that I hope you'll be able to then practice with yourself and eventually begin to, or, if those of you who are much more familiar with somatic work, to bring into your work. Okay. So once again, slowly beginning to settle in your chair, or again, you might want to stand up. Sometimes when we do focusing practice, we stand up, we move around. Some bodies like to really feel a sense of movement. And so you just get a sense of what would be right for you. If you have the body cards and the crayons handy or a journal, you can keep that right beside you. And if you weren't able to download now, don't worry about it. You can, if you've got some paper, you can maybe even just draw the shape of a body. It's very powerful to do this, to draw the body shape, because when you draw the felt sense in the body, as we will do, it's a visual cue, and it becomes a kind of resource that you can use to take yourself back to this experiencing. And so we'll go through the practice, and then we'll just take a kind of 5 minutes to kind of be with yourself, to settle inside, because it's a tender place. And then we'll come back and get more into the nitty-gritty of polyvagal theory, the third version of my model. Okay, so settling yourselves once again. And if you feel safe enough, comfortable enough to begin to soften your gaze and close your eyes. We're going to move attention inwards, being with your body, noticing if it feels okay to do this. If it doesn't feel okay to do this, just ignore my instructions and go to where it feels okay for you. You just let your body decide. So bringing awareness down somewhere into the center of your body. Feeling your feet connected down into the earth. And feeling how the earth holds you up. how the earth supports us as we're all here together. And just breathing. And just noticing sensations in your body. And maybe getting a sense of tapping into your own neuroceptive process, the body's way of assessing safety. So do you feel pretty grounded in there this morning? Or maybe there's a kind of anxious flight-fight place that you can feel inside. A little bit of adrenaline pumping or cortisol. Or maybe you feel kind of sleepy, a bit lethargic and heavy, a bit sad. Or maybe even kind of numb and shut down. Just being with your body in a very non-judgmental way, checking to see, where am I in my nervous system now? And then see if you can invite your body to find a place that feels okay in your life. It doesn't have to be anything big, just an experience, a moment in time where you feel okay. It might be one that was recent. It might be one from a long time ago. Or you also might make it up. It might be something that comes from imagination, a place where you feel good, where you feel okay. You can manage. And then notice what it feels like in your body. Physically, where do you feel this place in your body? And you might want to just put your hand where you feel it on your body, to touch our own body, to touch into ourselves, into our physical body, and notice where this place is, where it lives in you, and it feels okay. It might be the soles of your feet that feel firmly planted into the earth. Just notice where it is. It might be in your heart center. Feel a kind of warmth. There might be an image that comes with it. Often in the felt sense, there's an image. And then see if there are thoughts that go with this place that feels okay. And feelings. This is a place that you can create inside yourself that can begin to feel like a safe inside place. A safe place inside each of us, which is really the only place that we can really feel into safety. It's inside us. And maybe it's just beginning to form, and that's all okay. This is a practice, and it's one you can come back to many times. Every day you can make it a daily practice. You can teach it to your clients. You can teach it to your children. You can teach it to your partners, your friends, to be with each other in this kind of felt sense way. And then maybe there's what we call a handle for this place, a word or a phrase, or it might be an image, or it might be a gesture, something that captures the essence of this place inside that feels okay. And just let it form. Don't push anything. It might not come right now. It might come later today as you're walking around doing something in your life. You notice this place in your body. It's deeper than a sensation. It's a whole felt sense experience that carries a kind of wisdom in knowing the step forward that your life needs to go to keep growing, just like plants know the direction to carry forward. Our bodies know this too. They know the direction of healing. They get stuck, but they do know it. And so now that you've got this, I want to invite you to see if it would be okay to look around in the body and let your body choose an experience that was a kind of a hurt or a wounded place, not the worst one, but one that you could be with now, where you needed some soothing. Just to look around and find a place like that. And if a really hard one comes that you don't want to be with now, just ask it to be beside you. Ask it to just go to the side. This is what we call clearing space in focusing-oriented therapy. Getting the right distance from something that's too big. So finding a place that feels wounded, and then notice what's happening. What's the story? What was that wound about? And where did you go to find some soothing or some comfort? How did you manage that needed place? And how do you feel about how you managed that place? Is that something that you would still do now as a way of soothing yourself? This is how bodies heal. When there isn't enough inside safety, bodies will go to these ways that end up hurting us. They're self-harming, but they also help us in the moment. And they often become addictive because they're so effective at shifting these autonomic states in the body. So we just notice, we're noticing, oh, what was that like for you? And noticing how adaptive that was at the time. And how it may not be adaptive now. And to let that place know that we're going to work with that in the next hour. And then what I'd like you to do is to slowly kind of tuck this wounded place up, however it needs to be cared for inside, and to slowly begin to find that handle for the okay place, the grounded place that we started with, the place where things feel okay in the body. And to find that word or the image or the place and locate it in your body. And really invite this grounded place, as small or as big as it is. Sometimes it's just the beginning, and that's all okay. Just to come back and to be with the wounded place. To be with compassion for the wounded place. And then notice how the body, just inviting your body to shift into that more grounded, more okay place. To appreciate whatever came in that focusing practice. Whatever came. Maybe it was too scary to go there, and that's okay too. It's all information. Whatever comes in a practice is all information, and we just notice it and we welcome it. Because even those really uncomfortable places to be with are very much helped when we notice them, we name them, and be with them with respect. And really honor the dignity of our own person. And then as you slowly begin, people are noticing peace and stillness inside. It's so beautiful. And this is what we can offer our clients through a somatic practice. We just take our time. I'm actually going to give you now 5 minutes to be with all of this and to really welcome and invite you to make a body card or to write in your journal and to really take some time. And we're going to come back in 5 minutes and work more with triggers.
Jan, we do have a question that came in. I don't know if you just want to give people more time.
No, let's get going.
Okay. Yeah. Someone asked, did we just experience what is called pendulation, going from safety to tender and back again within the practice?
Okay. Yeah. I saw that. Yeah. I'm going to do now more about the actual autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
So I'm going to go to screen share. Okay. Okay. Kara, are people back?
Yes, people are back. We actually have a few people that did their body cards.
Oh.
And we're trying to figure out how they can share it.
Oh, beautiful. So should I stop share?
No, you can share. It's going to take a minute. So you can continue and then we'll.
Okay, I'll just continue on then.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Beautiful. Okay. So here's an example of some of the body cards of that grounded place inside. And you can see how user-friendly these are. So particularly, I mean, adults, these are all adult cards, but children, of course, would love to do this as well. And it's a beautiful way of really using the right hemisphere, really activating the right hemisphere in that kind of visual quality and bringing it right into the body. And then you can use these as resources so that when we're struggling to try to find a way to calm the body down, using these as just a way of really freshly being with these beautiful states inside is very powerful. So this is an example. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to get to polyvagal. An example of what the brain looks like. Uta's brain looks like when she's in this shut down state, all that gray area. And then Stan's brain when he's in that flight fight state in the body. This is the Siegel's window of tolerance that probably a lot of you are familiar with. The hyperarousal flight fight and the hypoarousal of collapse. Here's an example, an example of the fight flight body cards. Again, you can see how powerful this is in terms of really activating these states and and documenting, naming them, and helping people to understand what happens inside when you feel this way. And this is the fold or the collapse and the shutdown state in the body. This is the dissociated place, this kind of vice inside that then leads to a real shutdown. The model that I created also includes a learning model of addiction. So we don't use the brain disease model, we use a learning model. Mark Lewis's work, beautiful work. There's a whole chapter about his work in my book, The Biology of Desire. He's a neuroscientist. He was also addicted to heroin. So he has this incredible combination of ways of being able to understand addiction and trauma. Great, great book, and really important to read in terms of understanding how addiction works in the brain with neuroplasticity. But I'm not going to go into it right now because I want us to keep going. So there's 5 basic theories that I built into the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model. It's complex, and this is just meant to be a little intro to get you interested, so that we start with this feminist trauma-informed model at the beginning. We went to focusing, interpersonal neurobiology, the learning model of addiction, and then polyvagal theory. So here's Steve Porges' beautiful quote that when I read this, I knew I had found a home for my model. So Steve says, if we want individuals to feel safe, we don't accuse them of doing something wrong or bad. We explain to them how their body responded, how their responses are adaptive, how we need to appreciate this adaptive feature, and how the client needs to understand that this adaptive feature is flexible and can change in different contexts. Then we can use our wonderfully creative and integrative brain to develop a narrative that treats our atypical behaviors not as bad, but as understandable in terms of adaptive functions that may often be heroic. So Steve created polyvagal theory in 1994, and Deb Dana has done some wonderful work with translating the theory into practice, our psychotherapy practice, and she calls it the science of safety. And it helps us to understand the importance of the autonomic nervous system and how it shapes our capacity to create a safe and a grounded felt sense in the body. Steve Porges discovered the unique features of this dorsal branch of the vagus, which we're going to go to. Very important to understand this notion of the intervening variable, but let's start with the inside. So the inside of this is my latest model. And in this latest model, you can see that flight-fight place and the fold and collapse place in the nervous system. And the down at the bottom is the flock place. This is what we're doing right now. This is the ventral branch of the vagus nerve. And all of what is happening in the autonomic nervous system really determines our response to the stimulus that we experience. Because if we're in that anxious place, we're going to understand life through that lens. If we're in a shut down place, we're going to understand life through a shut down, sad, or numbing kind of lens. So here is the client version of the model. I made a clinician version as well. We call it the 6 Fs just to make it simple. And in this version, you'll see that we broke it down. I'll show you here into, so here are the 3 main branches of the autonomic nervous system. This is what I've come to understand was back then flooding and numbing. And now here we have, so there's 3 branches. Flock is the grounded ventral branch that we just practiced in that beautiful safe space inside the body. Flight-fight is the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. We all are pretty familiar with that. Usually people know that place of adrenaline pumping where the body mobilizes to try to escape from something that feels unsafe. If the body cannot escape, it goes to the fold, collapse, shut down place. And this is the branch of the nervous system that Steve Porges identified with newborn babies that were premature, because their little ventral branch of the vagus wasn't developed properly. And so when they were sick as little wee babies in incubators, instead of going to that sympathetic branch of flight fight, which we would think the body would do, it would raise the heart rate, because there was no maturation of that ventral branch of the vagus that calms the body down, the babies went into fold, collapse, dorsal. And that's where Steve Porges said, wait a minute, there's another branch to this nervous system. The traditional model, we just have flock and flight, fight. But what he said is we're missing this other branch of the nervous system that is really what we then as trauma therapists said, oh, we know this place, it's dissociation and shutting down. It's like living in the basement of your house to try to conserve energy when something's wrong upstairs. So it can seem overwhelming in the beginning, polyvagal theory, but once you hang in there, it took me quite a long time to really digest and integrate how to really think about it. But it's worth hanging in and learning more and more about it over time, being patient with yourself. I've tried to make some of the lessons around polyvagal theory fairly accessible in my book in terms of what's helpful to us as therapists in understanding it. So then we have these three blended states in the nervous system. So the three basic ones, and then these blended states are the places where there's a blending of one branch of the nervous system with another. And the easiest way to understand this, I think, is through this fun, fired up place in the nervous system, which is a blending of the grounded ventral place of calm and regulation and engagement with other people, connection. Connection is really the heart of how we help ourselves to feel safe in the world, inside ourselves through connection. So that's the ventral branch of the vagus, where we call flock in the 6 steps, where we socially engage. This is another aspect of Steve Porges' work. The social engagement system was evolved over time. The newest piece of the nervous system branch where we see this in our faces, right? When we look at each other and we engage with each other and we connect with each other. And this part of the nervous system is really compromised in trauma, as we know, right? But in this blended state of fun or play, as Steve Porges calls it, is a blending of that ventral part of the vagus with mobilization of movement in the body. But it's a blending so that you can hear, for example, when children are playing, that they're having fun and they're kind of, they're kind of fired up inside a little bit. There's some sympathetic mobilization going on. But if something goes wrong and somebody gets hurt, you will hear children either go to flight and maybe start to run away or to cry, or to fight and to hit back. And that response in the nervous system then becomes a full-on sympathetic response. The grounding of that ventral branch of the vagus and the social engagement system is lost, and kids are dysregulated. And our job, and this is of course what happens with all of us, with adults too, and in partnerships and in families, it can fire up quickly. And so what we want to do is to teach our clients through our own understanding of our own bodies and our own autonomic nervous system, how to develop these practices to come back down into a ventral place in the body. And the practice that we just did is one of those ways. So we've got these 3 main branches of the autonomic nervous system: the ventral branch of safety and social engagement. We've got the fight-flight branch, the sympathetic, And then if we can't escape, we can't mobilize, the body goes to shut down and dissociation to protect us from overwhelming experiences. And the intertwining states, we've got flow, which is that beautiful blending of ventral and dorsal, because we're still in our practice, say with focusing or meditation or some kinds of psychotherapy, somatic practices. Lovemaking is in this place of flow as well. We're still and we feel safe enough to be still. And then we just talked about the fun and the fired up place where we're mobilized, but we also feel safe inside. And the fixate place is the place of addiction. So this is the blending that became really clear to me as I learned more and more about polyvagal theory. So addictions propel us from one state to the other, back and forth. So now we can think about how are we working with polyvagal, the polyvagal model, in working with parents and with children. And one of the ways that I like to talk about this with parents and children and to bring in the model and the 6 F's, those 6 different states, is through a practice that I just called calm, as a way of being able to really invite people, particularly to teach it to parents in the beginning, to ground inside. And so thinking about the ways in which parents can use these different letters to remember how they're working with themselves inside. So C, we called co-regulation. So this is a way of finding that calm place in the body, the ventral branch of the vagus, like the practice that we did in the beginning, and understanding that polyvagal theory really teaches us the power of co-regulation, that we are born in relationship and we interact with each other in relationship continually. And that connection with each other is what helps us to then be able to regulate inside. So in our top-down Western world, we tell each other that, we first have to self-regulate and then we can regulate with others. But what we understand when we go slow down and into the body is that we are born in relationship right from the very beginning of life. And it's that connecting with another person in this calm kind of way that helps us to regulate through that flock ventral branch of the nervous system, through socially engaging with each other. And so very important to teach this to parents, that when you're helping parents to help their children to connect with their own bodies, to really teach to parents that their capacity to regulate themselves inside needs to come first, right? So they can, for example, take the model and pin it up on the fridge, the 6 F's. They can teach it to kids. And, then at breakfast time, for example, if you're working with younger kids in particular who kind of grow up with it, you can ask them in the morning, where are you in your body right now? So then you can move into asking your child, right? How do you feel? And then helping them to trace where they are on the 6 F's. And they actually like doing this. It helps them to get clearer about what's happening inside them, because we know that based on where they are in their state, they are going to respond to the world. So to teach this to parents and have parents understand that this impacts their relationship with each other and with their children. So if you're feeling in a fight place in your nervous system, you're probably going to respond with an edge of anger or maybe even a real outbreak of anger. And knowing this about yourself, that what you need to do is go back to finding some place inside in that felt sense to slow things down and take a breath, is really the place to start, to come back to that practice as a way of then being with your child and teaching your child the same thing. That if they get upset, they can find this safe place inside themselves, and they can make a body card, and they can carry it with them, or they can find a little symbol that reminds them of that place inside where they can calm down their body. And it may be that they use their connection with you, which is really what kids do, actually, if things are going well. So L, for parents, listen to your own felt sense. So what do you feel is happening inside you, and then with your child? So you see, this whole process really shifts the paradigm into us becoming more embodied and us teaching our clients how to live more in an embodied way inside, and to calm down the nervous system, and to not judge or punish each other based on how we respond, if it comes from this flight fight place or from a shut down place. So if you look over at your partner, or the couple that you're working with, or one of the children in the family, or one of the adolescents, and you see this clouded shutting down, you know that this person is probably retreated into a kind of dorsal place. And what they need to do, probably in terms of helping themselves, is to mobilize a little bit, right? To come to life, unless they're in an environment that is so unsafe that the autonomic nervous system will not shift. And if that's the case, if you're in a war zone and you shut down, that's the body taking care of itself. And we honor that. And that's a very different way of working. So we really work in collaboration with the autonomic nervous system, and understanding that where we are will impact how we respond. And this is what Steve Porges calls that intervening variable. It's what comes between us and responding to the world. That's a very important thing to really appreciate and get when you're working as a therapist, I believe. And then M, maintaining daily practices together. So you can do daily check-ins with the 6 Fs, and then also with the body cards, and with focusing practice over time. You can become more and more familiar with how to work with focusing. The International Focusing Institute teaches lots of courses. So do I at Focusing on Borden, my training center, and lots of people around. It's an international organization. And then we have the 3 Circle Practice, which we're going to go to in a minute. So here's the model again. But this time, this is the Felt Sense Polyvagal Dialogue Model. So this is something that I created, where I crossed imagotherapy with the Felt Sense Polyvagal Dialogue and made different characters that actually are borrowed from Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt's work in imagotherapy that some of you may be familiar with. It's wonderful work. And they've actually started to integrate polyvagal theory into their work as well. I went to visit them when I wrote my book, and I wrote a chapter about that. So this is a way of teaching couples and families how to resolve conflict, how to communicate together, that integrates the nervous system. And so you can see even right here that little kids in particular would really love this, because if you look, for example, at fight flight, Harville and Helen call this the hailstorm. And then we put a rabbit behind it, because rabbit is the flight part, right? It's like, that's where you flee to get away. And even now, if you have a look at this, you know, usually people are pretty good at getting a sense of what is your default autonomic state. So, you know, I know for myself, for example, that my default state when I feel threatened is flight, fight. My partner's is fold and collapse. That is a very common kind of partnering together in a couple. And I believe that it is often the source of the power struggle, because people don't understand those ways that their bodies are autonomically responding. So this is an unconscious shift in the body in autonomic states. We don't think, oh, gee, I better go to flight, fight. It happens unconsciously. And neuroception, that way that we try to figure out where to go in the body, is all unconscious. But we can start to become more aware of it as we want to work through these trauma states in particular. So, polyvagal theory, this is Deb Dana's 4 stages, which I really like. We recognize the autonomic state. We respect the adaptive survival response. We regulate and we co-regulate with that ventral vagal state. And then we re-story. The story of what happened when we work through a trauma changes, very much so. Here's an example of the clinician version of the model, much more polyvagal language in here. As you begin to develop more of a sense of understanding it, it really then becomes less overwhelming. And it's just a really great way of having everything kind of there together. You can see addiction at the top. The top half of the model is the trauma loop. And that's the place where bodies get stuck, right? In flooding and activation and then numbing. And so what we do as therapists is to help our clients to shift out of those neural pathways down into the the practices that of what in polyvagal theory they call stillness and I called flow. So down in the bottom half of the model is where we want to be living our lives much of the time. But of course, things are going to happen in life. We are going to need to use those defensive states of mobilizing and immobilizing and addictions as propellers of those states back and forth. And what we do is then we help our clients to orient to the felt sense model. And we use this as well as a way of assessing where our clients are at. So here's an example of a client pathway comes into the session in that sympathetic state through our practices of grounding, of flow states, of focusing, of psychotherapy, coming into the body, whatever kind of therapy modality that you use, you can integrate into this model. So it can be somatic experiencing or any of the ways. And so we just see though that we're tracing, right? We're tracing and helping clients to come back down into ventral, as we did in the beginning practice. And then here's the addiction cycle that we really show people this. They really understand that what's happening here is this trauma loop that needs to be shifted so that they can really develop a life that feels like it's worth living, as Marsha Linehan would say in her DBT work. And here's the ventral blended states where we feel grounded, we're connected to the ventral vagus, we're connected to that social engagement system, which shuts down when we move up into trauma. It's compromised. It doesn't completely shut down always, obviously, but it becomes very compromised at times. And so our job is to engage that slowly over time. Addictions will start to to slow down as the body feels safer to be more present. I developed an embodied assessment and treatment tool to be able to work with this kind of process, these two embodied processes of neuroception, the autonomic nervous system, and felt sensing of interoception, different ways of being able to connect with the feeling states inside the body. It's what we call interoception. And meditation is one of those ways, many different ways of doing that. You actually can use the assessment tool in Excel in a spreadsheet. So it becomes also a process recording, and it helps you to really start to develop a treatment plan. It's hard to see this here, but you'll be able to zoom in on your own when you look at the slides. It looks complex and it's not simple, but over time you develop a way. Here's an example that you'll be able to have a look at. In my consultation groups that we do once a month, we present clients and we go through what are we doing what are we actually doing in the process? How do we name what we're doing? And how do we really understand and appreciate why we're doing what we're doing, which is really the heart and soul of being a professional. And we include additional modalities. So whatever way that you're working with your client will fit into these two embodied processes. So I want to end with this. This is the 3 circle practice that I use. I tend to use this practice along with the 6 Fs, those 2 handouts that you have, and the body cards. And when you've got those 3 with your clients, whether they're children, adults, couples, you've got a tremendous amount of information that you are using in your own mind to assess, but also sharing with your clients and helping them to use them as daily practices to check in with each other. And you can make it fun as a family too. So this is a practice that was adapted by Patrick Carnes. He did some wonderful work in sex addiction. He does use a more pathologizing model, but his work is really great. And what I did is I integrated the autonomic nervous system into the 3 circles because it fits so nicely. And I'll show you an example of that. So over time, we make with our clients, and you can use this with children as well, older children, but you can also just think about it with your clients who are younger in terms of what it is that they are actually doing and what they need to do in order to be able to make some shifts in the nervous system to feel more and be more grounded. The inner circle is the place where you put the behaviors, the addictive behaviors, or the behaviors that are really not appreciated by the family members, for example, or say for kids at school. You put those into the inner circle when people feel ready to commit to making the changes, and not until, because it's kind of a sacred place where you're really holding yourself accountable in a loving way. And so this is an adult one. And you see it's an example of somebody who's working on some eating dysregulation issues. So they've put in this inner circle 2 desserts a week. That's the limit that they're committing to for themselves. They're committing to not watching pornography, and they're committing to not smoking any marijuana. So that's a big commitment that this person is making. And it takes time. It takes time for the body to let go, remember, of those adaptive ways of helping the body to survive when it doesn't feel safe. So our job is to recognize when there are triggers, which are in the middle circle, and that in fact the body is safer than it is detecting through what Steve calls faulty neuroception. because of trauma history. Trauma history dysregulates the body, and then it gets stuck in this traumatic feedback loop. So this is where we ask our clients to really get a sense of what is it that triggers you and sets off those states of sympathetic flight, fight, or shutting down. And so you see for this person, it's things like changes in COVID restrictions is very hard for them. Fighting with their partner, racism as a systemic kind of oppressive challenge in their lives. Conflicts at work is another place. And then underlying all of that, we often see is a sense of loneliness with folks who are really struggling with addiction. So this is just one example of somebody's kind of really known triggers that they have to watch out for. The outer circle are the ventral places, practices in our lives, that blended states of, play and sometimes a state of getting kind of fired up about something, but in a way that's grounded, something you might feel really passionate about. So it's got some sympathetic surge, but you feel fairly grounded. And then the flow states, meditation practices, focusing practices, and the ways in which we socially engage with each other through the ventral vagus. So you see for this person, spending time with friends is a hugely important practice, and one that often when we're stuck in addictive states, people avoid because they go into isolation. Focusing partnerships, we focus in our community together in partnership. And so this is a very, very powerful way of regulating, because you're with another person and you're co-regulating with their capacity to also ground in the body. And so it's a really powerful and profound way to practice coming into a ventral state. And then journaling is a really helpful grounding and daily practice for a lot of people. And then daily check-ins with the 3 circles. So, and with your Felt Sense Polyvagal Model. Where are you at in the circles? And what do you need to do today to keep yourself grounded? So for example, if you look right now and you say to yourself, okay, where am I right now? Well, I'm kind of, I'm kind of stressed out, for example. So I'm feeling a lot of kind of that sympathetic surge and flight fight. So that's what I feel in my body right now. And you can guide, and help your clients to really discern this, right? Through noticing, stepping back, sensing in. And then if you're in that kind of dysregulated state, what you'd want to do is remind yourself, okay, let's look to the outer circle. What do I need to do today that's going to help me to stay more grounded? Well, playing piano would be great. It always helps me to calm myself down. I might say to myself, yeah, I don't play piano, but I know that it is very helpful for some people as a grounding ventral practice. So you might say, okay, well, at lunchtime, I'm going to play piano for 20 minutes. And I know that that will help me through the afternoon. So there's an example of how you would very intentionally plan your day. And you can see that there's lots of educating in this model, and there's lots of real intentionality. But it takes that level of intentionality to shift these rigid pathways, neural pathways that have become addiction pathways with these strong dopamine hits. It takes a lot of intention, a lot of practice, and a lot of encouragement and compassion to really be able to make those shifts in the neural pathways in the brain. The good news is we can do it. brains change and they heal over time. And the more you're bringing your clients into this ventral outer circle, the less they need to go into that inner circle and use addictions, and the less they want to, because life wants to live. It feels good to be living in the outer circle, but it's a real challenge and a process to help people really cultivate enough of that they start to really, it becomes reinforcing for people. So here's my book. If you want a 20% discount, you can use that discount code. And I also wanted to share with people, we have some upcoming events here. Did you want to share these, Kara, now?
No, we could go back to the questions.
Okay, I'm going to stop share then.
Sure, yeah. And then we'll bring this back up at the very end, if that's okay.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Jan. You know, it's occurring to me, Jan, as I'm listening to all of your wisdom and amazing information, that it's not every day that we get to have a therapist who's currently practicing turn their practice wisdom into these incredible models with so many different people informing them. I mean, it's really brilliant. And I so appreciate all the hard work you put into it. We feel so lucky to be
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we do have some questions.
Great.
Yeah, so someone had chatted in that during the exercise, they were trying to find a wounded place or experience, but they were having some difficulties. Do you have some examples of that? Some suggestions there?
Well, you know, let's go back to, that's interesting. It's something to be curious about, right? Let's go back to what's that about? So where I would go is I would go back to the 6 Fs. This is the place to orient, right? And to say, where am I right now in my nervous system? And it may be that you're just really feeling good and very grounded and ventral, and there's nothing really wounded coming. But it may also be that you're feeling kind of shut down and numb. And so the body is deciding, the nervous system is saying, we're not going there. We're in this kind of protective, adaptive, numb state that likes to dissociate from wounding. And so we're not going to go there. And so I think, you know, again, like really orienting to your nervous system, to be curious about that in a completely non-judgmental way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Curious about your nervous system, everyone. And that means really the essence is also about being curious about the nervous system of those we work with, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that. You can see that in how they're holding their bodies, right?
Yeah. Somebody asked, is it ethical to share this if we are trauma-informed and trained, but not clinical therapists?
Yes, with the caveat that you want to be careful about what your scope of practice is, and what your particular body, how they regulate your practice. But yes, for example, in my consultation course that meets once a month, I have people who are body workers. They're not psychotherapists, but they work with the autonomic nervous system in the body. So do people like cranial sacral therapists, lots of different people. In fact, polyvagal theory and this model can apply to really any discipline, because we live in our bodies. So one that's really developing right now that's really exciting is actually in medicine. Imagine bringing into medicine the different way of understanding health and wellness through the lens of the autonomic nervous system and the needs for safety. Yeah, so absolutely you can.
Thank you. Somebody was asking if you have a bibliography of all the books that you've mentioned.
Well, there's a good bibliography in my book. At the end of my book is all the books that I used
Okay.
To write and research. It's layered, right? Those 5 different theories, because I've been doing this for 40 years. So it's kind of like where I went over the decades. Yeah. But also another thing to do with that is to start with something like The Body Keeps the Score, or Trauma and Recovery, or whatever kind of you were really excited about, maybe Stacey Haynes or Resmaa Menacem's book, or there's another really great
his
new
book. Is amazing. I think his book is such an amazing depiction of trauma.
Exactly. Yeah. Wonderful work. Wonderful work. But there's also a book called Polyvagal Theory in the Developing Child, which came out recently with Marilyn Saunders and George Thompson. And that is, if you're working with families and children, a very good book to look at. And what I always do is I go to the back of the book and I look at the bibliography of whatever book I'm interested in. And then you'll get a whole other range of books that you can go to from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions. One is, I'm sorry, I lost my. Is there a typical time frame for vagal ventral health to heal, or is it all situational?
Well, we usually say with working with trauma and addiction that you need anywhere a good solid 2 to 5 years. It's not short-term work when you're working with these neural pathways that have been deeply entrenched. And addictions, are deeply entrenched in the nervous system and in the brain, in our biology. So it takes time. But of course, the more that your clients are willing to practice these daily practices, the more it's going to shift in the body. But we don't rush things. Bodies take time to collaborate with you and to feel comfortable enough. And especially now, because there's just so much stress in the world. Mm-hmm. Everybody is feeling dysregulation. Of course, that's an adaptive response. Yeah. But we are too as therapists. So we really have to take care of ourselves. We are our own instrument, right?
Did you hear that, everybody? We have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
To co-regulate with our clients, we do. Yeah.
So the trauma loop is what triggers the addiction, right? This is kind of a summary question, I guess. The trauma loop triggers the addiction. Is it merely about disrupting this loop in treatment with helping to create an internal sense of safety and connection? I know there's a lot more, but it seems like
the trauma loop from flight, fight to down, mm-hmm. shutting down to freeze and then shut down is the loop that occurs. That's the backup plan, as I call it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we go to when we haven't got enough ventral energy. And yes, addictions serve as propellers that mm-hmm. shift us in those neurophysiological state. They're what Steve calls state regulation strategies. Mm-hmm. And so our job is to change those neural pathways by introducing practices like psychotherapy or focusing practice or meditation, or mm-hmm. through those outer circle, mm-hmm. Behaviors that engage us socially, things mm-hmm. that we're doing like right now, Kara. Mm-hmm. We're in a flock social engagement practice mm-hmm. right now in what we're doing. So we can feel into that, and the more we give that to ourselves, the more the brain changes the patterning and we shift down into that ventral pathway.
Mm-hmm. Especially if loneliness is one of those key ingredients to addiction, right? Then really
loneliness usually underlies. I don't think I've ever worked with somebody struggling with addiction that didn't feel really lonely and isolated, even if they're in that addictive state with other people. Mm-hmm. There's often, not always, but often the majority of that time still feels compromised in terms of the engagement with other, because you're distracted by the need to soothe that desperate need to soothe, right? But of course, bodies move and change. It's not static. So
never.
No. And so I mean, when, you know, I'm doing an addiction group now and like people are moving into flock a lot, but whether they sustain that when we're not together, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to mention to people that I am doing a 2-hour, don't know if you can put that in the chat.
Yeah, but they're saying that in a few places, they're saying that the Jan-student link is not working. I think it has to be all caps, Lorraine. I don't know if you tried that.
It has to be all caps. If you have trouble, just email me at janwinhall.com and we'll sort it out. I'll get my web guy to sort it out. But yeah, it would be great. You're welcome to come. And I'm going to do a real concentration on the dialogue. So that imago piece of the way that we can interact with each other in couples and with families and with children, that is really informed by the nervous system. Because it changes everything when you understand, oh my God, my partner shut down. So if I keep going, they're just going to shut down even more.
Angel said that they signed up and the code worked. Great. One more question.
Oh, good.
Well, two more, sorry. So some of this is making some of us think about the role of generational trauma and historical trauma, and wondering how we also help move through that through this process.
Yeah, so intergenerational trauma is a big part of all of this. And you know, really recognizing how through the felt sense too, right? How that intergenerational trauma impacts your body. And there's also a beautiful growing movement of really studying lineages and understanding what is our lineage and how do we as different people in the world, where do we come from and how did these lineages get started, and these ways that we have cut ourselves off and hurt each other and hurt ourselves. And when we really bring all of that into the felt sense in the body, it helps a lot to know that it's not just coming through us, but that it's coming through our family, right? Our parents, our grandparents, and to be able to really be with that and acknowledge that, and then to be able to make a space around it. So it can breathe. It's not all mine. And I'm carrying it. And how much distance do I need to get from that in my body to be able to feel a sense of breathing around it? So we do a lot of practices in focusing called clearing space, which are, very similar to other practices. They all kind of converge into these very similar ways, right? Because we're all going to the same place. It's that natural process in the body of tapping into the body's wisdom of healing. Yeah, thank you.
And also historical trauma, and I'm reminded that we're actually living through historical trauma current, right? And
right now. Yes, I'm actually doing a training for Ukrainian therapists. Oh, yeah, right. This is what really brings home is that what safety is what's inside us. We have to make it inside us because, it's not outside of us a lot of the time. Yeah. Very challenging.
Very challenging, for sure. One more question. It sounded like, is it automatic that people become dysregulated and stuck after experiencing trauma? It sounded like it was a cause and effect. Somebody's wondering.
Well, that's interesting, right? I mean, some people go through traumatic experiences and they don't develop post-traumatic stress, and other people do.
Yeah.
And we know that, right? Some people are way more susceptible, which of course probably has a lot to do with what levels of intergenerational trauma you're carrying in your body,
Mm-hmm.
or previous traumas that have occurred for you.
Mm-hmm.
So we never know for sure. We have to check in with the body to see. And it's always quite remarkable when people have gone through incredible things and their bodies don't get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And probably because there's a lot more ventral energy in there, right? That pathway is well worn. And so there's a place for the body to return to. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Then last question. Then we're gonna, if you can bring up the slides again. But I just thought this was such an interesting question just now. Someone's really into nutrition and foods and wondering if there are any foods you consider your go-to to support the autonomic nervous system.
Oh, that's not really my field, but
Something to think about, Jan.
Sorry?
Something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure people are researching it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll look into it. I think that's a great question.
It is a great question. Yeah.
All right, let's bring up the slides just quickly as we say goodbye to Jan. And thank you so much. We just wanted to look at our upcoming events and conversations with Dr. Tony featuring Cindy Stanford of acesmatter.org. And then conversations with Dr. Tony featuring Michelle Munson. On May 11th, we have Youth Justice towards a socially just, trauma-sensitive mental health systems of care for young people on May 12th. And thank you all so much for being with us. This was 2 hours and it seemed like it went so quickly. And so that's a testament to your wonderful work, Jan. And
thank you, Kara.
Take good care. And I hope our paths cross again.
Yes, I hope so too. And goodbye to everyone. Be well and be safe. And thank you. Thank you so much.